Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News Podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you are tuning into today's podcast from. And great to be back behind the microphone. It has been quite a bit of time, actually, since I've had a day recording podcasts. We bulk recorded loads in the spring of this year in anticipation of a busy time out in Las Vegas, of course, for Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live in Las Vegas, and all sorts of other projects that the team at Event Industry News and Event Tech Live have got going on, and I've got going on within the events industry as well. So today, after a bit of a break, is my first day back behind the microphone, and it's great to be back in the swing of things and having some good conversations with some good people, which is a nice way of moving over and welcoming today's guest. My guest today is Matt Gray. Matt is the founder of Event Decision, a company and an organization that we're going to be finding out a little bit more about today. They were involved in last year's Event Sustainability Live event, the inaugural event at Excel London, and as I understand it, will be returning for this year. So let's welcome Matt to the podcast. Matt, good afternoon.
Hello, James. How are you?
Very well, thank you indeed. And I did comment off air before we hit record on today's episode. I was like, is that a really wonderful virtual backdrop? And no, Matt, as you said to me, that is your actual office.
It is, yeah. I refer to it as the cabin halfway up a mountain, but in reality, we're about 30 miles outside London, based in Surrey. So, yeah, it is a lovely environment to be able to work in, to be honest.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned in the introduction there, you were part of the inaugural Event Sustainability Live event at Excel London last year. And event sustainability is very much where Event Decision, I guess, comes into the industry and has its part within the industry. Why don't we start by giving us a little bit of personal background, your own background, and tell us how Event Decision came to be a few years ago?
Yeah, of course. I'm a 25-year-old veteran, I'm told, is the expression to use, of the events industry. Nearly all of it was spent agency side, so helping sell, design and deliver a really wide range of events all over the world, from Boston through to Kuala Lumpur and pretty much everywhere in between, from incentives, conferences, launches, activations, sales, product stuff, all different types of events over 25 years. And I'm really lucky. This industry has been fantastic. I've stayed in some amazing places, some less amazing places, and had all the fun at the fair with everything that event profs love, which is the long hours, the sore feet, the tired eyes. They're beautiful, wonderful clients who value our input all the time, but actually provide us the opportunity to showcase our skills in such a variety of ways. And 25 years of that, and then finally struck out on my own in the middle of the not to be mentioned COVID era.
Yes, I suppose it gets not swept under the carpet, but it's amazing how quickly time moves on, and it does seem sort of like a long distant memory now. But to strike out at that point, I guess, marketeers and business leaders always say, throughout history, some of the biggest brands in the world that were, are synonymous with different markets today, really, really hit it big by being bold in, dodgy times, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. I think back to the story of Kellogg's, and during the Great Depression, that's when they really went massive with their advertising, their marketing. I think is a story, and they went big. So history will tell us that it's always a good time to strike out if you can be bold enough to do so.
Yeah, no, I'd love to be associated with brands the size of Kellogg's and otherwise, but it did provide a lot of us time for reflection. Whether we wanted it or not, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And having spent quite a lot of time agency in my entire adult life working for events agencies, there was the opportunity to look at doing something else. And event sustainability wasn't the first kernel of an idea that came to me, but it is certainly the one that has proved attractive to event planners and event deliverers. So that is, we've developed and we've not got it right every single time. We're barely 3 years old. We'll be 3 years old later this summer. We've got 120 or so agency partners whom we work with to understand, mitigate, and deliver more sustainable events, and about 70 brand partners that we do the same for. But have we got, I think we've probably offered 5 products and 3 of them have been successful. So it's been, a pretty exciting ride for nearly 3 years. I think all the products that are on offer right now in terms of event sustainability have proven value and are being used on a daily basis by agencies, and not to forget our association, congress, and venue partners as well. So but it's we've not got everything right first time. Who does?
No, absolutely. And again, if you could be bold enough to say that, some things have worked, some things haven't, I think that's always a mark of, an honest business, and one that's looking to improve themselves, as well as if never trust a business that say it was perfect from day one, because that's never ever going to happen. But also, one thing on the subject of sustainability, you'll have met a lot of people in your course of working in the events industry who use the term expert. I am an expert in something. And I suppose expertise in this business is only built really with experience in doing so. And so that 25 years of being on the agency side and working with all those different events that you alluded to at the start, it no doubt puts you in a position where you can reference almost every scenario, I guess, in the industry, and therefore draw on some real world experiences into how, the subjects of sustainability thing can then be moved on forward from here onwards.
Very well put. Yeah, absolutely. And that experience has proven invaluable. And I use that word literally, invaluable to the growth of this business. And it continues to be really important. When we recruit people, a lot of when we're talking about Track, which is our carbon product, the benefit to our partners, our customers with Track, is our ability to interpret their event planning documents. So to have experience of a wide range and seeing and knowing what those beautiful Word, PDF, and Excel documents, 50 pages worth of 5 days worth of schedule, actually translate to on the ground. It's part of the service that we offer. So we can, to some extent, fill in some gaps where they are clearly and obviously activities happening that are not listed, or to be able to understand the logistics behind coach movements or room blocks or shoulder nights, or some of the AV terminology that gets used on the more technical side. So actually, when we're looking to recruit, and it's something that we are taking advice on. I'd love to take on apprentices and people just coming out of the university courses in event management. But in reality, the service we provide does require experience of these feet on the ground, everything from dragging suitcases into alpha order and across the range of skills that we possess as event profs. So actually, whilst all in favor of event management degrees, of apprenticeships and so forth, we're possibly not the best company to take people up on those qualifications. In fact, you come to us with 20 years of freelance or agency or corporate or venue experience, then we look to go, okay, fine, we can provide you with some wholesome, useful, recompense work. So it is. I refer sometimes to my agency life as my apprenticeship for this.
Sure. No, and it's a good way of putting it. And the subject of experience versus education is one that has cropped up at regular intervals over the years of doing this podcast. And the values of getting a good theoretical background against the values of having hands-on experience. And I think it would be fair to say, in the most in the interest of diplomacy, that there is a balance to be struck between both. But again, that depends on the particular vertical or particular area that you wish to work in within the events industry. And as you said, not every aspect, and people forget sometimes just how many different aspects and niche sort of little job roles there are within this industry, depending on the types of event that you work in, depending on the locations, the types of venues, that there are so many little different idiosyncrasies that, again, going back to that 25 years of the agency stuff and all of those different venues and clients that you'll have worked with, and being able to draw on those, I think is it gives you a massive toolbox.
Hugely. And to balance it out, one of the first things, well, not one of the first things, probably 18 months in, was I went and did the Cambridge University backed course on high impact sustainability leadership, which was brilliant and hugely useful. And I still lean on it today. And Laura in our team has a similar one, and Emma in our team is going to undertake the Oxford University version of the same. So where there's a lot of people in events, as you know, James, and there's a lot of people in sustainability, but you're right, there's not so many experts in the middle, but that number is getting larger. As I said, we've only been going 3 years. Event sustainability wasn't talked about a lot, let's be frank, before the pandemic. So to expect the industry to have developed a whole cadre of people well versed academically and with the badges to prove it, and the experience in real life, is asking a lot. But we're getting there.
It is, and if you sort of argue that event sustainability as a term, as a sector, call it what you will, let's say it's only really been at the forefront of our thinking since the pandemic. So let's give it 5 years for argument's sake. I don't think anybody could become a true expert in anything in a period of 5 years. You need prolonged experience, prolonged reference points. Any research project undertaken by a university, by academics, requires longevity. It requires data over a long period of time in order to sort of look at it and actually draw any meaningful conclusions. And I think at the moment, a lot of people are looking for experts in the industry. And actually what they should be maybe doing is adopting that more collaborative approach, is looking to people with experience, and rather than pitching yourself as an expert, pitching yourself as somebody who can work collaboratively alongside organizers, maybe to offer them guidance and advice rather than expertise.
I think that's probably the same in every industry, James, but you're right. In a way, the events industry is one of the most sustainable industries out there, right? We're flexible, adaptable, we're all these wonderful things. Because we've needed to be. You only have to ask some of the PR agencies that represent the industry about SIC codes and all that kind of stuff. There's a reason the government doesn't recognize us for what we do, and didn't provide us with a great deal of help in said pandemic, is that yes, we needed it, but actually we've come out the other side. And we've come out, I think, stronger. The industries that did get more support were those that wouldn't have survived. So it's difficult, and actually we have no more or less expertise in this industry than other industries. It's just that we are quite small, and I say that openly. We're quite a small industry on a global level. When the large NGO organizations, United Nations and so forth, when they look at sustainability, they look at large industry, which they would refer as to travel, mining, pharmaceutical, automotive, all these very, very big capital intensive industries. We're not like those, as you know. The difference with us is we are small and nimble, but we touch each of those industries, both in their own events and on a broader sectoral basis. So we're kind of unique. I think we punch above our weight. But in sustainability terms, we're kind of reliant on every other industry. We're not going to get to, in carbon terms, net zero without help from hoteliers and hospitality businesses, without help from transport and aviation businesses and so forth. But neither are them. So it's a collaborative business from the very top, and by very top I mean like global level, all the way down to your local AV company working with your local hotelier, working with the local caterer or food supplier to try and deliver that on a more sustainable basis. So we're sort of everywhere without having a giant home, if that makes sense, in our industry. And we're expecting ourselves to deliver an awful lot very quickly.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've considered on number, going back to this thing about where people work in different niches and they kind of find themselves working in a particular element, I've kind of carved my own little niche as a freelancer where I tend to regularly deal with technical production. So there's an element of AV, there's an element of planning, there's an element of logistics of stuff coming in and being built and then taken out and got rid of, and show operations and event operations. And one thing I've considered is we're an industry that builds in a lot of contingency and a lot of backup into our planning, which is a good thing. And if you take, AV as a simple, real world scenario, if you need 10 XLR cables for a particular job, AV companies will pack 20 or 30.
Yep.
If they need 100 meters of 3-phase power, they'll pack 300 meters, and so on and so forth. They need one laptop to deliver the video content, they'll pack 2 or 3 and have 2 levels of redundancy built in. And that's the nature we do things, which is why the events that professionals at that level deliver such great events. But a lot of that redundancy is never used. A lot of that backup is never used, yet it's transported to site. And if you were to total up the amount of trucking that gets involved in towing equipment, actually, that very rarely gets used just in the AV element of our industry, that there's all sorts of potential savings or rethinks maybe that could be had there. And I think that's not even scratching the surface of the wider industry. That's just one small example within one area of the industry, where potentially there are huge savings.
Counter that, James, I would say actually all those items you mentioned are relatively small in terms of transportation and weight, and actually they're items that go back into stock. So you're not consuming those items. One of the biggest areas of consumption we're asked about on a regular basis is swag. And if you've got 1,000 people going to a gig, back when I used to organise, we'd order 1,500 to make sure you've got enough and cover every eventuality, and those bits that get left over, they're not put back into stock. They get given to friends and family, or worst case, they get put in landfill, having been shipped over potentially from the Far East, depends on what it is. And it's those items of consumption that we should potentially worry about more than, AV is pretty good.
Yeah.
We're reusing the same kit thousands of times, and stand builders and expo companies are getting much better at that as well. I remember the modular systems 10 years ago were pretty basic, and now we look at stand schematics and it's really hard to tell whether it's stick built or whether it's modular systems sometimes.
And I can attest to that, because that's what we've done with Event Tech Live in the last couple of years with our main contractor. We're using a system, and it's called different things, but it's this modular framework where you can put stretch fabric over it, and it's replaced what we would have called traditional shell scheme, and it looks spectacular. And it could be reused, and people could take their graphics home. And we know one company in America who took their graphic home from back to their office, and then had it mounted as a great big graphic in their office. And they use it now, so when people walk in.
You probably just forget I'm mirrored, so I was pointing the wrong side. But these background here, you can see that's exhibition background that we've used at various expos in the UK now multiple times. They come back and they go on the wall behind me. But I mean, the trick with sustainability is, and I remember 2 or 3 years ago, we've had this conversation many times with expo and event organizers. If something was going to be shown to be sustainable, it had to be built out of disused pallets and bits and old plants to prove, we've got a zero impact. Our argument's always been, surely the whole point is to deliver something that looks exactly the same as the shiny white corporate stand, or the stage set that's impressive for a 3,000 person sales conference. It looks exactly the same. The awesomeness is in the design, not the materials, which material science and the way we use them in events is moving along really quickly. And if you could maybe reuse bits or all of everything as much as possible without chucking it in the bin. And that's what we all used to do. So, things are changing. They're changing very, very quickly. 3 years ago, every agency had their hand in the air, like at school, I guess. Pick me. We do sustainable. We get it. We understand it. We do it better than anyone else. We've done it for years. And I know that because I was part of an agency that used to do that. Then they were all flooded with work post-COVID. And it became apparent to, and not just agencies, but venues and brands too. There were some very quick wins in sustainability.
Yeah.
But those have mostly been achieved or actioned. So from a venue, you're replacing your light bulbs with LED and so forth. Others have taken longer, exhibition carpet, but even that's getting there now.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of activity very, very quickly within event sustainability, focused purely on carbon. So it was all about delivering things with a lower carbon footprint and effectively getting to net zero for your events and for your own company.
Sure.
And that's slightly a different conversation because even that's moved on. But we've seen in the last year, there's been yet another shift within sustainability away from just carbon and into the social side of sustainability. And how do you measure that? And it would be remiss of me not to say, obviously, Event Decision does have a product called Impact, which does measure, benchmark, and advise, so audit and advisory on E, S, and G, the environment, the social, and the governance part of your event. But I think probably in the last 9 months, I know I have, but the rest of my team have talked more about social sustainability in a way than carbon. Different areas of this event sector focus on different bits. Travel incentives, it's hard to do that with a small carbon footprint if you're doing lots of long haul flights. So they focus on the social sustainability piece, others more on the carbon.
Yeah, and it's important that you raise that point, because when I first started to have sort of sustainability conversations on the podcast here and try and sort of get my own head around what it meant and what people could do, broadly speaking, is there's this sort of instant thinking, or there was this instant thinking of, okay, recycled coffee cups, let's not try and use as much paper, let's try and put people to public transport. And it was thanks to some organizations that were guests on this podcast, educating me in elements like diversity, inclusion. These all have an impact on sustainability, staff welfare, training, CPD. The better an organization looks after its staff, the more likely the staff are to stay with that company, which means that you don't have to invest time, money, and resources in training new people. That in itself is a sustainable practice. So this term sustainability, I think, confused a lot of people in the early phases of it, in that they thought it was all about recycling and energy use. And there's a much wider sort of, spectrum of sustainability practices that people can adopt.
Absolutely, and you're right, and in fact, the carbon side of it, which is this recycling, reusing, and trying to keep carbon emissions down to a minimum, is important, and it's the side of our industry that I don't think we're regulated in this side, and never will be, but our customers are. So when we're talking about big global organizations, they are certainly in the European Union and by extension in the UK, and coming in the US post-election year, I would imagine. Over here, we have CSRD, Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, which means that our customers have to measure their Scope 3 emissions, which includes events. So it's not the sexiest part of our industry, that's for sure, but it has a standard unit of measurement, the ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. And that's, a numbers game that event creatives and event profs can feed into by delivering more sustainably. You're right, though, on the social part, that's the beating heart of an event, right? We talk about ROI and engagement and of people and storytelling, and you get that with the human part. Even the creatives will agree with that. And this is where, the social sustainability comes in. And seeing some of our customers understanding that events they've held, not every part they've organized, because they've got a lovely, great, efficient, experienced supply chain there, but events they've organized have helped people get back on their feet, people into our industry that otherwise wouldn't, people start a career and continue a career, be it pushing flight cases, be it becoming a lampy or a noise boy in the technical side, or even in the with Elevate starting their new gen program, trying to get people with more diverse, non-traditional backgrounds into the events industry. And that's real stuff. As well as like more tactical stuff, like reusing and redistributing food.
Sure.
We have a real client that held a real event in the Liverpool area where they fed from one event in one night in one hotel. They fed 36 families, I'm not saying individuals, families, with the leftover food, families that would otherwise not have had a hot meal.
Brilliant.
Now, that's like, why don't we do this stuff? And we're getting better at it. So I'm not going to
Yeah.
knock the industry because we can't change overnight. But I suspect more and more of that type of heartwarming, genuinely good things to do that we can achieve together as event profs, and they don't really cost any money. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And never underestimate the feel good factor and what that can do as well for a team. You know, if you're a big event organizer and you start delivering elements like that, don't underestimate, I think, how big an impact that can have on the on your employees and on the people working for you when they realize what decisions you've made as a business, and to tell that story then to your staff and in your next company newsletter.
yeah, and externally, I mean, this is marketing gold dust.
Yeah.
You know, if you're happy to link good outcomes to your brand values and what you deliver in real life, then where better to do it than an event?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I should probably suggest that Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live take a look at this for the event later on this year at London's Excel. There's a hostel. We have to talk bluntly in this business. There's a hostel very close
Well,
to Excel, with 500 people in it getting back on their feet. And there's organizations that help those people by getting them into event work. So,
and
yeah,
and this is where
no, of course it is. But you know, if we don't say these things, then nobody will. And we have to lay out the challenges for agencies, brands, show owners, and corporate in-house events teams to say, yeah, we want to be associated with some of that stuff. How do we do it? And that's our real job.
Absolutely, and I think that this is very much where the collaborative, you know, the conversations, emails, communities, call them what you will. You know, when you work in a big venue like an Excel or an NEC, or in its you know, even Olympia, and even sort of slightly lower down than those sort of size of venues, you're often, well, you are generally speaking tied in to what you can do on a food and beverage front. You know, you have to use their in-house catering facilities. If you don't, there are usually large, you know, sums of money that have to change hands in order to bring it. So for the most part, most events at Excel, for example, will have to use the catering there that's on site. So this is where conversations have to take place between organizer and venue, where there is that level of contract involved. You know, how much control can the organizer have over where any waste goes, you know, or how much can they do to find out what the venue is doing with that waste food? And if you look on Excel, it's probably a good example because they have a fantastic sustainability document and guidance that's made available via their toolkits to any organizer that runs an event there. You can see exactly what practices they're undertaking, what they're doing as a venue, and they've got a great track record of the sustainability side of things. And it's something that I've been looking at literally in the last few days as part of our own event and the practices they're doing. But this is where, again, if you then take it down a level into something like a hotel, you organize a conference, a 1 or a 2 day event in a business hotel, is how many event organizers are actually talking to that venue in advance and saying, look, what happens to this? You know, is there anything that we can do to work with things like food waste and anything else that can be contributed locally? And I think a lot of the time when the events finish, that's when the conversations between venue and organizer stop until they need to rebook it for the next year.
Yeah, but that venue, because it's usually the fixed locations of events where you get the repetitive business, obviously, you know, has the opportunity then to create some assets to support the more transient event organizers, the brands, the agencies, and so forth, to engage with local organizations, be they on the food side or the education or, you know, schools and so forth. And, you know, hats off to people like ACC Liverpool and Visit Belfast, I think, have actually got brochures for organizations in the local area who would be grateful for some support that events can give pretty simply. You know, and I shout those out to out gladly because I know they've done it. We'd like more people to do it. The interesting thing is in the States, and I know EIN operates in the States as well, is actually whilst in carbon terms, popular opinion is that US brands are a little bit not behind, but lagging in time, behind some of the European and UK brands. In social terms, A lot of the event providers and venues especially are pretty good in the US. When we visited the States earlier this year to meet some customers, their first question was really interesting. It was, wow, is sustainability a threat to the events industry?
Mm.
Now, if you take that literally, one would hope not, because you and I discussed for the first 5 minutes of this call why we're a brilliantly sustainable industry. So
Yeah.
I think what they mean is carbon measurement. That's what
Sure.
the lady on the day meant. And the
Reduction in
art,
numbers visiting and things like that because people are
yeah,
paying attention to it.
with face-to-face events goes a lot of travel. I know a lot of your partners, for ETL will be virtual providers, and they might have a different story. But I think with many things in life, we're reaching a sort of even compromise where organizers know which model of delivery suits them best. And that's going to continue to evolve. So is it a threat to our industry? And we'd say absolutely not. The sustainability, whether it's in carbon or social, or ideally both, such a massive opportunity for organizations with their eyes open.
And if you look at your traditional B2B trade show, for example, if going back years, if for a business, a medium-sized business exhibiting at a trade show for whatever industry they work in, to put their sales team on the road and go out and meet all of their potential clients or customers and drive around the country doing that, that argument still stands today, no matter how far we've become technologically advanced with phones and emails and everything. The fact still remains that exhibiting at something like a trade show and being able to meet people in 2 or 3 days in one place is far more efficient, far more cost effective, and in today's practices, far more sustainable than putting a sales force on the road and driving them around the country to meet those clients.
It is, yes. Our argument would be, in reality, is the sales rep really going to go and visit, 250 suppliers? But when you look at a trade show, it has some inherent advantages. Some of the largest events that we've reported on in terms of carbon emissions for the last 3 years are big global trade shows at big European venues, enormous footprints. Now, is every exhibiting company going to have a sales force that's going to travel globally to visit all of those potential customers? Maybe not. But in terms of like face-to-face value, and it's a good thing that face-to-face is great, right? Because we're both in events and we need face-to-face and we like face-to-face. It is probably the most efficient way to do it. You're right. I mean, virtual exhibitions were filled that wonderful gap in the COVID period. To our experience, but we work generally in live events. We don't see so many of them nowadays. I'm sure there's some very efficient ones out there, but I don't think the event industry is going anywhere, but we need to learn and to educate our customers and our partners to just do it a little bit better. And I don't mean do it with zero carbon necessarily, although attractive as that is, doing live event activity has an impact. We'll leave the offset to a different discussion. But I think the ability to be able to quantify that and to minimize it as best you can, whilst at the same time maximizing the benefit of the social value of events. And I don't mean meeting at the bar at the stand at 5 p.m. or 3 p.m. sometimes nowadays. But I mean, in terms of, the event activity generating social value will never go away. And brands are desperate to be associated with that stuff. And rightly so. You're not going to argue with it. There's going to be politics in this. There already is in the US. The term ESG, environment, social governance, has become somewhat politicized in the USA along party political lines, which we needn't go into today.
No, crikey, no, not after last weekend. But
so we talk more about responsible events. What's a responsible event? How can we deliver this event more responsibly, looking at the environment and looking at the potential damage that we might cause there, and looking at the social and what benefit we can bring. And yes, of course, some of this costs money. What you expect to develop a load of change within your program for zero money? It's never happened anywhere else.
Yeah,
but it needn't. It needn't be cost prohibitive. And I think we're still in we've seen a flurry of reports in the last 2 weeks alone saying that sustainability is slipping down the priority list of corporate event organizers. It's it's come out in the Business of Event Sentiment Survey for 2024. 2022 and 2023, the same survey showed sustainability in top two factors, top of the list. This year, bottom equal out of 10. There's also some evidence from ICE, in-house corporate events, but it's not across. CNIT have just published today in July something that says it's still very valid. Of course, it's valid, but in a cost crunch, in a cost of living crisis, which translates into expensive hotels and expensive venues and expensive food and expensive people and expensive kit, you can't do an event without the event infrastructure.
Of course.
So you're going to focus your budget on that. And I think, like most things, like we said, between in-person and virtual, there's going to be a balance of this stuff, and it's more sustainable delivery. It's just going to become part of the way we do things. But we're so early in that process.
That we are. Yeah. With one eye on time, I wanted to ask you something related specifically to an element of your offering, and it's the track, the event decision track, where you're measuring or helping events to measure carbon footprints, and whether or not you're able to take all the data that you're collating for individual clients and then create a wider and broader picture of event carbon footprints, as a means to have sort of ongoing wider statistics for the industry. Is that something that is a focus and at the forefront of the thinking behind the track offering?
We're running quite fast below the waterline, but yes, it will come to the top, and we will be delivering that sort of data. I mean, it's all out there. Anyone who commissions a track report, which is a carbon-focused report on an event, already gets a benchmark of how their event is performing in sustainable terms against other events of a similar nature. So that's already comes out. In terms of industry-wide statistics, and I've lost count of the number of times we've been asked for, what's the carbon footprint of the average event? And for us, it's a meaningless statistic. It's, we're comparing 120,000 people traveling to the Rye in Amsterdam with a car launch for 40 people in California, with a global soccer tournament, with a sales conference for 200 people. They're effectively meaningless comparisons. But what we can do is benchmark by event type. And you already get within track reporting. You already get that within impact reporting, which is our wider view of sustainability, which is our kind of responsible event review we mentioned earlier. You already get the benchmark of how you're performing against other event organizers. I see it, with all of our products. So that's tracking carbon, impact in terms of wider sustainability, and evolve, which is specifically for show and expo owners. If you know of any of those, James, then you get some absolute data. This is your impact. You get relative data. This is how you're performing. And you get some advisory within each of those as a matter of course. And that's what people expect. They want to know, what they could be doing. They want to know what they are doing, and they want to know how that compares to everybody else.
And that seems a really appropriate moment, again, with one eye on the clock, to maybe ask you how people can do that if they want to find out a bit more about what Event Decision are doing, point us in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I couldn't say anything other than have a look at eventdecision.com. Event Decision, all one word. Look at that on the banner as if it was planned. Eventdecision.com, everything's there. But by all means, hello at Event Decision will come straight through to a member of the team, and we can help you out with whatever it is you need to know.
It's been it's been another great conversation. It's been a while since I've had the sustainability conversation on the podcast, mostly due to the fact that we've had such a sort of big break over the sort of late spring and early summer period of actually recording them. But it's good to kind of get the brain working again into that. And I think that's probably reflective of a lot of people in the industry. They'll go through phases where they're thinking about it a lot, and then their mind and attention has to be diverted to other things fundamental to whatever they're doing within the events industry, and then their mind will turn back to it. And I think one thing we've kind of all agreed on, or I get the feeling that we're all agreed on, is that even if it does sort of go like that, where it's at the forefront, then it's not, then it's a forefront, then it's not, just keep the conversations rolling.
Absolutely. I mean, sustainability is not, we've flirted with it as an industry in the past, but with legislation, with commercial benefit in doing it, and we're not the arbiters of this, but the moral, case for doing things a bit better, it's not going anywhere.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Before we wrap today, just a couple of little mentions for our own bits and pieces. Of course, this is the Event Industry News podcast. And if you are listening to this via your podcast platform, thank you very much for doing so, first of all. But please do remember to head over to eventindustrynews.com. If you work within the industry and you're looking for a supplier or a service, something specific, the chances are you will find it on the A to Z supplier directory over on eventindustrynews.com. Of course, you can also find video versions of all of the podcasts on the website. You may have already gone there as your first stop today, and you may have been watching this podcast from beginning to end. If you've done that, thank you very much for watching, but please don't forget to go in the other direction and make sure that you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, so that you get notified and updated of all the new episodes as they drop. And a little shout out for both Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live London in November. Submissions for both of those events are now open. If you work in the industry and you wish to submit an idea for a topic or deliver a session at either of those events, then submissions are open. Just go to the websites for either Event Tech Live or Event Sustainability Live, and you will be able to submit session ideas for both of those events. And they close soon, so please do get your ideas in. Which brings us neatly and nicely to the end of today's episode. Our thanks once again to my guest today, the founder of Event Decision, Matt Gray. Matt, thanks for taking a bit of time out and having a chat to us on a Monday afternoon.
Absolute pleasure, James.
And we will see everybody again on the next edition of the podcast. Thanks very much, everybody.